It's important for people to realize Hamas is not the only actor in Gaza which has been firing rockets. There's also Islamic Jihad and other groups. What is the likelihood that Hamas will be able to stop other groups from any form of aggression? Because as part of this ceasefire agreement, they are responsible for a cessation, a stopping of all aggression toward Israel by all factions.
Okay, Henderson, I just heard a large explosion in the distance. As far as that goes, certainly Hamas, as far as Israel considers Hamas to be the government in Gaza. They don't recognize it, but they consider it responsible every time a rocket is fired out, every time there's some sort of disturbance of the peace, so to speak. So they will be obliged to some extent to try to stop other groups like Islamic Jihad, like smaller organizations, from breaking the ceasefire. And Hamas has really gained a lot out of this war. You have to remember that back in January 2006, when Hamas won the parliamentary elections, the Palestinian parliamentary elections, the United States and Israel immediately took steps to isolate it politically, economically, in every possible way. Now we find that Hamas has hosted leaders from Turkey, from Egypt, from Qatar, foreign ministers from a variety of Arab countries. It's gained quite a lot in the last 8 days, and some people here would say it would be foolhardy for them to lose their gains simply because some small faction decides to launch a rocket over the border. Anderson?
And you're looking at a live picture on the right-hand side of your screen of Gaza City. And I want to keep that picture up as we continue our discussion to see if there are any more incoming shells from Israeli Defense Forces, any outgoing rockets from factions, from Hamas and other factions inside Gaza, joined also by Wolf Blitzer here in our studio in Jerusalem. You just spoke to Mark Regev, the spokesman for the foreign ministry,
for the prime minister.
For the prime minister. You asked him some key questions, and for some there were not answers. In particular, what happens to the borders, to the blockade of Gaza City?
I think that'll depend if this thing holds. If the rockets no longer go into Israel, if there's no firing at Israeli troops who are patrolling the border, if that stops, I think the Israelis are prepared to take some steps to ease some of those blockades, some of those restrictions. But that's going to take a while. That's not going to go into, I suspect that's not going to go into effect right away. The Israelis want to test Hamas right now. They want to test this agreement, see what happens over them, not just the next few hours, but the next few days, see what's happening, and then they'll begin to reciprocate, I suspect. But I don't think they're going to do much right away.
But he also made clear that the Israeli government holds Hamas responsible for all the factions, Islamic Jihad, any Al-Qaeda-related groups, anybody who's firing rockets against
And that's
Israel.
a problem, as you were just there, Anderson. You know that Hamas may not be able to control every element, every disparate terrorist organization that may be operating there, and they could sabotage it if they get an opportunity. Some of them might want to do that. So we'll see. I think there is a good relationship between the Hamas leadership and the Egyptian government of the new president, Mohamed Morsi, who himself is a leader of the Muslim Brotherhood. There's a whole new regime in Egypt right now. And what's intriguing is not only the U.S. administration of President Obama, but the Israelis. They went out of their way to praise President Morsi for his role right now. So potentially there could be an improvement in Israeli-Egyptian relations if this agreement holds. That's obviously a big if right now. We're going to see what happens in the coming hours. We're watching it closely.
And Ben Wiedemann, Egypt has a role in basically monitoring developments and has a responsibility now, according to this agreement, at the parameters of the ceasefire. Egypt, will they be able to stop smuggling of Hamas weapons through those tunnels from Egypt into Gaza City? Because there's a lot of concern, obviously, on the Israeli side of the border that Hamas will simply use any kind of a ceasefire, use any stopping of violence to basically replenish their stockpile of weapons.
It really is up to the political will of the Egyptian leadership to make sure this happens. We've seen in the past that the Egyptians will sort of tighten and loosen their hold on Gaza when they see fit. When there are tensions, for instance, in the days of Hosni Mubarak, when there were tensions between Hamas and the Egyptian government, suddenly it became very difficult for Palestinians in Gaza to leave the Gaza Strip and go through Egypt. Sometimes they would decide to crack down on the tunnels. After the last flare-up, the Operation Cast Lead in 2008, 2009, part of the agreement when the fighting ended was that the Americans would provide money to the Egyptian government to build an underground wall, steel wall, to prevent tunnels from being dug. What happened is the Gazan tunnel diggers are very good at what they did, and they were able to basically knock holes in that wall. So the Egyptian government is going to have to really sort of redouble its efforts to make sure that A, there's no smuggling out of Gaza into Gaza of weapons, and B, that they have an eye on what's going in and out. And certainly, if they take a passive approach, if they don't do that, then it will be very much a repeat of what we've seen in the past. A lot of weapons getting into Gaza, and others as well, people as well. You have to remember also that the Sinai, which since the Sinai Peninsula of Egypt, since the revolution in Egypt, has become something of the wild, wild east for the country. Thousands of prisoners escaped during the revolution, found their way in the Sinai. So Egypt has a double problem. It has to reestablish its control over Sinai if it's going to have any effect on arms smuggling into Gaza.